Hi, thank you all for watching this video. This is going to be a presentation by Michelle Hunt, who's a Fish and Wildlife Service biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And she works a lot on butterfly conservation and pollinator habitat. So this presentation is on the monarch butterfly life cycle and conservation. So thank you, Michelle Hunt, and you can go ahead and get started.
Well, good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the monarch butterfly, its life cycle, and its conservation. So a lot of people wonder, why is it called a monarch butterfly? So they believe that the monarchs are named after King William III, who is Prince William of Orange before he became king. So that sort of makes sense. It's an iconic butterfly, which probably means it's the most well-known butterfly in the world. And they're also really interesting. They migrate long distances to places they've never been to overwinter. And also they're an important cultural symbol in Mexico. They believe that when the monarchs arrive in the fall or the winter, that they carry their souls of their ancestors. So monarch lookalikes, some people get confused because there's about, well, at least 3 butterflies that look similar, including the monarch. So I'm going to put them up on the screen and take a look. There's the first one, second, and then the third. And so the first one is the queen butterfly, and you can see that it doesn't have those black wing veins. The second one is the viceroy. If you look on the rear wings, they have a second line that crosses the wings. And then the third, of course, is the monarch butterfly. So the monarch life cycle, most people know that monarchs go through metamorphosis. They start with an egg, which then turns into the caterpillar, and followed by the chrysalis or pupa, and then it turns into an adult butterfly. So this process takes about a month for the monarch to grow and change into an adult butterfly. So here we can see on the left, next to the person's fingernail, that is the size of a monarch butterfly egg. So they are very, very tiny. However, they have these diagnostic ridges, as you can see by the larger photo of the egg in the front. And that helps you to determine that you're actually looking at an egg. Milkweed does produce a milky sap, and so sometimes people get confused between the sap bubble and the egg. So a good thing to bring with you when you're out looking for monarchs or monarch caterpillars or eggs is a little hand lens. A lot of botanists or plant biologists bring those with them to take or get a better look or a close-up at different parts of plants. So here we have the size of the egg compared to the different stages or instars of caterpillars. The first one is on the right, and you can see it's very tiny. And that is the 5th instar. Caterpillars grow to about 2,000 times their original size. So they grow exponentially. So monarchs, of course, have the 5 instars. So when people are looking at them, they might think they're looking at a different caterpillar, but or a different species, but it's the same species. So the first instar, before it starts eating the milkweed, it doesn't really get those diagnostic bright stripes. And you can start to see what they call the tentacles in front, which are very tiny little protuberances on the caterpillar. And here you can see the tiny caterpillars on the right and the left again. The second instar, of course, it's growing bigger. It has tentacles in front and back. You can see the tiny tentacles here and here. third instar, you can see this is the molt on it. The tentacles in front extend to the tip of the head. Right here you can see. And the fourth instar, the tentacles extend beyond the head, as you can see here. And then the fifth instar, the front tentacles extend well beyond the head and droop down to the ground. So after this process, of course, the larvae form a J, or what they call the J stage, and this is before they go chrysalis. And here you can see this process over time. And here's the new monarch pupa. So here we can see up here, the monarch is getting ready to eclose. And eclose is just a scientific term for emerging from the chrysalis or pupa. It's quite a fascinating process to watch. And here you can see the adult butterfly emerge, and it takes a little bit of time to pump fluids into its wings before it can fly away. And here we can see the male and the female monarchs, and they both nectar on flowers. They don't have the chewing parts that a caterpillar has. Of course, the milkweed is the host plant. It's the only thing that caterpillars can eat, but the adults can nectar on a variety of plants. So the female is on the left. She has slightly wider or larger wing veins, and the male is on the right. He has two little androconial patches, which do not serve a purpose in the monarch butterfly. So this is a very important part of the monarch butterfly life cycle. So we have two populations, or three, in the United States. This is the Florida population. It does not migrate, but here you can see in the West, our monarchs migrate to the coast in California. The eastern monarchs migrate all the way down to Mexico. So they are the same species, just two different populations. And a lot of people wonder, how do these monarchs get to a place they've never been before? So the interesting thing is that monarchs have an internal compass. This compass uses both a clock, which is stored in the antennae, and the sun's location in the sky, which is determined using the large compound eyes. So the interesting thing also is they believe there's 4 different generations per year. And the first 3 generations, they only live 6 to 10 weeks, and they don't migrate all the way to California or Mexico. They do disperse, but they don't migrate to winter. However, the super generation, this is the one that can live up to 9 months. And so, as I mentioned, the ones we have here in the West migrate to California, and they need a warmer environment to survive the winter. So why are we concerned with monarch butterflies? So in the West, we have something called the Monarch Thanksgiving count, where volunteers go out and they count individual monarchs. So as you can see, back in 1997, there was about 1,200,000 butterflies. And you can see this number has gone down over time until we see that in 2018, we had a little over 28,000 butterflies. And now and last year they had a little over 29,000. So the numbers have dropped precipitously, but we can also see that we're still looking for them. In fact, our efforts have increased over time. However, we're still seeing extremely low and worrying numbers. If these numbers keep going down, we're worried we'll lose the migratory population of monarchs. So the eastern ones, we're excited in 2018 and 19 because the numbers looked better than they had over previous years. However, in 2019 and 20, they went down again. And this, in Mexico, there's so many that we count them in numbers of hectares that they cover in the Oyamel forest, which is in Mexico. That's the only type of forest they go to there. So back in, looks like 96, 97, they covered over 18 hectares, and now they're down to 2.83. So I'm interested to see what this winter will look like. So why? What happened to our monarch populations? The weather has been an issue. They get sick or preyed upon. Pesticide use, we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's been a huge issue here. And habitat loss. Also diseases and parasites. So there's something called OE, which is a protozoan parasite, and it really affects the monarchs. If the pesticide, or I'm sorry, if the protozoan load is too heavy, this can affect their longevity or their ability to migrate. Diseases and parasites, once again, here we have something called a tachinid fly, and these flies parasitize the caterpillars, and this causes the caterpillars, or in the pupal stage, the monarch to die. Weather. Here you can see an example of something that happened one year in Mexico. They had a serious storm, and that killed many butterflies that were wintering in the fir trees. Predators. So the interesting thing is milkweed has a toxin called a cardenolide, which when the caterpillars eat it, it is sequestered in their body, and then it also protects the caterpillars along with the adult. But there are a few kind of birds that have learned to eat the monarchs and not feel sick afterwards. And also some other invertebrates can eat the monarch caterpillars, and other things can depredate the adults. So pesticides, it's a big issue because when you spray your garden or when they use pesticides on crops, it's non-discriminate, meaning it gets rid of the insects you don't want, but also the beneficial insects. So they use it a lot in agriculture, and then people use it in their home gardens. So another issue that people oftentimes don't think about is where you get your plants and what the plants have been sprayed with. For example, if you get a plant and it says protected against white flies or aphids, it means the plant is pre-sprayed. And if your plant has been sprayed with chemicals, when a butterfly or another pollinator lands on the plant, it can ingest nectaring and getting pollen. And this is the end result of a pesticide being sprayed on a blooming tree. So this is something we absolutely want to avoid, because not only monarchs are declining, many other species of pollinators, say, for example, including the western bumblebee. So they have done some research on pesticides. And so in one lab study, they used a neonicotinoid and they gave it to adult monarchs, and over 78% of the treated individuals died versus 20% of the untreated individuals. So you can see that this pesticide is extremely toxic. In another study, they went out to the Central Valley of California, where many of our vegetables are grown, and they took samples from milkweed leaves, and they found an average of 9 compounds per plant. This shows how common pesticides are in milkweeds, and this could really be an issue in the early summer window of time when monarch larvae are likely to be present in the area. So this really points to the fact that pesticide exposure could be a contributing factor to monarch declines in the western US. So another issue is habitat loss. You can see on the right, this is an example of housing developments and just houses expanding into natural environments. And in Mexico, they've had an issue with illegal logging on the overwintering grounds. Habitat loss, another example is herbicide tolerant crops. So this is soybean and corn. And when it's grown as an herbicide tolerant crop, they can go in and spray, and it gets rid of everything but this crop. So what happens is the natural plants that might live along the edges or in between the crop rows, things like milkweed, are all killed. So you can see this is a graph of how much soybean and corn herbicide tolerant plants have, the growth or farming of these types of plants has really increased over the years. California coastal habitat, which is where our butterflies go. You can see that here's an example from Santa Cruz, and it's just this little spot where the monarchs go. And you can see the rest of it is housing development. So we really want to work on conserving these open areas with trees for our wintering monarchs to roost in over that winter period. So climate change, that is another issue. Monarchs are leaving the wintering ground earlier, and this may be a factor because many varieties of milkweed have not sprouted and are not big enough to be usable for the caterpillars. And it's also possible that monarchs are migrating later in the year, so fall nectar availability could be an issue. So the adult monarchs really need that nectar to be able to have the energy to migrate. So another thing, our agency, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we are looking at how the monarchs are doing in order to determine if monarch butterflies need protection under the Endangered Species Act. And when an animal is listed under the Endangered Species Act, it means we work to make sure we can recover that species. So currently, they found the population of Western monarchs has a probability of quasi-extinction of 98% in 60 years, or over 60% in 10 years. So that means we have a lot of work to do. So what can we do about it? Here is an example of a really good non-governmental organization called the Eastern Sierra Land Trust. And you can see in the upper left, that is grass. And grass really, it's not, most of the time they don't use a native species. And so this does not provide any pollen or nectar for the monarchs. So this is an example of what you could do in your own house. So here they did something called solarizing, where they put plastic over the grass to reduce the, they removed the grass and put the plastic over the area to reduce the number of seeds and to prevent the grass from growing back. So you can see this bare ground. It's very important to prepare your yard properly before planting pollinator plants. Otherwise, you'll have a lot of weed issues. So here, this is the end result. And I really want to encourage people to try to do this because it is not hopeless. A habitat like this is very welcoming for monarch butterflies along with our other pollinators. In the US, there are 4,000 species of native bees. So they're really important to these plants are very important to pollinators. And Great Basin, I apologize, the Galena Visitor Center has put in a series of pollinator habitats that are wonderful for pollinators also. So if you get a chance at some point, you can go by there and see a really good example of how they also have helped pollinators. So what do you want to put in there? You want to put the host plant, which is the milkweed. You want to put in nectar plants, and you also need water and shelter. So another thing that you can do is you can register your backyard habitat. Here's something called the Monarch Waste Station program. So currently we have over 28,000 registered in the United States. So how do you become a Monarch Waste Station? You need about 10 milkweed plants, and they recommend getting 2 different species, along with at least 5 kinds of other flowering plants to provide nectar and pollen. So plant milkweed, of course. And here's an example of a caterpillar on milkweed. So as I mentioned, native plants are wonderful for pollinators, and milkweed is not just a host plant for monarchs, it also provides nectar for other species like the swallowtail butterfly. So I mentioned that milkweed makes monarchs distasteful to predators, and I had to put this slide in because it's one of my favorite and one of my favorite slides, and it's kind of an interesting photo. This is an example of a blue jay that tried to eat a monarch butterfly. So in this photo, you can see the blue jay has spit out the butterfly because it didn't taste good to it. So here's an example of a variety of nectar plants. Natives are best because our butterflies and other pollinators co-evolved with these native plants. And you need things that bloom in the spring, summer, and fall. So here's an example of a Great Basin, which is the desert we live in, native pollinator habitat. And you can see there's a variety of different colored plants, or different plants that have different colored flowers, which attract a variety of different pollinators. For example, if you wanted to attract hummingbirds, you put in red flowers. And the other thing you can do is kind of clump them together with the same species, and that makes it easier for pollinators to find them. So you can see here, this is an example of what species like what colored flowers. For example, bees like bright white, yellow, blue, or UV. Butterflies like bright red and purple. Beetles can be pollinators too. They like white or green. As I mentioned, pollinating birds like hummingbirds like bright red or orange. And just in general, here's a variety of different colored flowers and what they would attract. So another interesting thing is if we put in these native plants, you get certain kinds of bees. For example, if you are growing things from the squash family, you'll get squash bees. If you grow globe mallow, you'll get the globe mallow bee, hopefully. So citizen science, that's something you can help with. The Monarch Waste Station is an example. It's any organized project involving students, teachers, or the general public, and they help scientists to discover information about monarchs and other pollinators. Here's an example, citizen science. That little tag has a number on it, and this helps us determine where the butterflies are going. If it's tagged on the wintering ground or along the migratory route, people with binoculars can look at the number and see where the butterfly came from, and hopefully we'll see it on the wintering ground and where it goes in California. So here, I like this example on the right. A male monarch was tagged on 9/29/15 at Gardnerville Elementary School, and they recovered this monarch in Santa Barbara on 12/11/15, and that monarch butterfly had flown 305 miles. So this is a program through a non-governmental organization, nonprofit, called the Southwest Monarch Study. And another interesting thing you can see in Arizona, those butterflies, some go to Mexico and some go to California. And I just want to tell people, even though the numbers don't look great for our monarchs, our efforts can make a difference. Monarchs can exist both in disturbed and pristine habitats that are shared with many pollinators. And they're interesting organisms from which we still have a lot to learn. And the migration is so important and it's unparalleled. Questions? So I'm going to turn it back to Sam Bellis, and she'll tell you a little bit more about the process for submitting questions. If you'd like to know more about monarchs, I'm happy to answer them. And if you want, this is my email address. You can send me an email and I'll be happy to respond to any questions, ideas, and how to improve your backyard for monarchs.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. That was awesome. And since you mentioned pollinator habitat, I just want to mention that we did a video on creating wildlife friendly gardens, and we do talk a lot about monarchs in that video. So if you want to check out that, that's great as well. And you can reach out to Michelle directly with her email, or you can email us at visitorcenter@gbinstitute.org. And that'll be in the description below as well. And we can answer all your questions about monarchs.